Welcome, everyone. I'm extremely grateful for your presence, and I am humbled to speak to you today. This is the first meeting of the General Obligation Bond Advisory Task Force. We have a lot to talk about, so let me get straight to the point. Edmond is competing with other cities for creative opportunities in employment, recreation, health, residential, and lifestyle experiences. We are currently a one revenue source community. We need revenue to take care of aging infrastructure and put in new infrastructure and improve our overall quality of life. Last fall, city staff provided the council with information related to the funding gap related to non-utility capital projects versus funding available. Over a 10-year period, the City of Edmond projects needs currently are $495 million, with an estimated $158 million in funding available. In November, the City Council added the following to their strategic plan for 2024. Appoint Citizens Committee to recommend appropriate projects and funding levels for a general obligation bond election. That is why we are here today. That is the charge of this committee, recommending appropriate projects and funding levels for a general obligation bond election. Edmond is growing, and with your help, will continue to smartly grow to address our increasing needs. There is a lot of information that will be presented to you today for your consideration. Let's roll up our sleeves and help take Edmond to the next level. Thanks to all for your contributions and especially for being here today.
All right, so I know I've sent lots of emails over the past week and a half, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to dive in to the 100+ page packet. The good news is you don't get 100 pages of new information every meeting, so we try to get you as much as we could up front. The first couple of things that were attached were just a couple of resources for you, and if you find them helpful or not. One was was some sheets that would help you determine an individual property tax rate depending on the address. Because one of the things that was being talked about is like, well, if you live in this city, your property tax rate is this, or if you live in this city, it's this. And if you really look at those sheets, it's a lot more complicated than that, depending on your school district, your technology district, and your municipality. So that's in there. And then also, to the best of our ability, we put a historical timeline of all tax votes in Edmond, which was really fascinating to put together. There's not a lot of additional detail, but some of the things that when you read back through some of those old newspaper articles are kind of interesting. So those are just some initial things that we have for you. I will be, for the most part, as we move forward, especially after we elect a chair and a vice chair at the end of this meeting, you all will be running these meetings. My role will be mainly if something is maybe not in line with how the open meeting is supposed to run, or if you have a question, can we do this, can we not do this? I'll be here to kind of chime in on that for the rest of the meeting. So what we want to do real quick, because we got a lot to do, just a real quick introduction so that everyone can put a name with a face, go around the room, you all are going to get to know each other. And I know we've got some staff in the room as well, because if there are any questions, we want to make sure we had subject matter experts in the room. So if you all will go around and introduce yourselves, and then we'll have staff introduce themselves, and then we'll keep going right along. So we'll just start right here.
What do you want me to say? Just my name?
Yeah, just your name. I think let's keep it brief in that way.
Caleb McCaleb.
Okay.
Craig Perry.
Rick Wright. Brett Town. Jay Lemon.
Michelle Schaefer.
Todd Overding. Clint Thompson.
Most of my Bridget, but please call me Cujo.
Sean Conrad.
Kristen Strecker.
Marcus Jones.
Jennifer Miller.
Howard Graham, but I go by Bud. Most people don't know, they would not know who they are.
We'll change that for the next meeting.
I didn't know.
Rick Smith, I go by Rick.
Josh Moore. Phil Frame.
Brandon Rader.
Kristen Kilgore.
Todd McInnes.
Jay Buxton.
Janelle Randall.
Brian Wendell.
Jill Raines.
Okay, and the reason we just did names, I know some of you know each other, some of you know what you're involved in, what you're not, but we really have a pretty good cross-section of folks that have been involved in a lot of things, or maybe haven't been involved in a lot of things. So really happy to have everyone here that is serving and thankful for your commitment. So, any city staff that might jump in, Scott, you want to start?
Scott Ruby.
Andy Conyers,
Randy is.
Brad Murray,
Steve Lawrence.
Jan Fees.
Chris Denton.
Chris Goodwin,
Bill Beckley.
Brad Brady.
Kevin Ryan.
Katie King.
Jane Robertson.
These are all the people, oh, and Raina's over here in the corner. So Raina's gonna record all of our meetings. They'll be uploaded to YouTube, so you can go back and rewatch anything, or if someone asks you, hey, what happened in that meeting, you can literally share the link with them, and they'll be able to get all this content as well if they're not able to be here. So Raina, thank you for being here too. So, these folks are all the subject matter experts, so when really important questions come up about specific projects or some other things, they'll be able to handle that. So with that, I'd like to invite Kathy O'Connor up and let her introduce herself and kind of her role in all this. So Kathy, come on.
Thank you. Well, good evening. My name is Kathy O'Connor, and I have a consulting firm called the CoAlign Group. Just a little bit about me. I worked for the city of Oklahoma City for almost 30 years. I was the city's finance director for about 12 of that. I was an assistant city manager for 11. Left the city and we founded a nonprofit that managed all the city's economic development and redevelopment work. So it was called the Alliance for Economic Development. I ran that for 11 years and left about 2 years ago to start my own consulting firm. So right now, it's called the CoAlign Group. We do work with municipalities like Edmond. We're working with Norman and Perry and Chickasha and just lots of different communities with different kinds of issues. And then I also work with real estate developers on complicated financial structures. So that's a little bit about me. The city of Edmond hired me to help them look at this issue of whether or not general obligation bonds for infrastructure made sense for the city of Edmond, and to look at some of their other funding sources that are temporary in nature and how those things all fit together. So since they hired me, I've been doing a bunch of stakeholder interviews. I've talked to a lot of you, some of you around the table and in the room about these various issues and where Edmond kind of fits into this discussion. And then finally, after I did my stakeholder interviews and talked to some people, I made some recommendations to the city council. So one of the things that we talked with people about was Edmond has a 1 penny sales tax for operations that is a temporary tax, but they use it to fund ongoing operations. And when I put my old finance director's hat on, I would tell you that that's an incredibly bad financial practice for a city to undertake. And in Oklahoma City, in fact, that would be contrary to the city's adopted financial policies, and we would only use that money for capital improvements. So it's been in place since the 80s, and it gets re-upped every 10 years, or it has in the past, but one of the things that we've been talking with people about is whether or not to make that a permanent 1 penny tax to support operations. And just so you know, the rest of the story with that tax is 2/3 of it goes to support police and fire. So if it were to go away, it would have some pretty serious impacts on your community. So you all don't get to discuss that. That's going to be for the city council to take a look at, but that's one of the things that we talked about. And then the other one was, how do we provide adequate capital improvement funding for a city that is growing quickly, and expanding, frankly? I mean, your geographic boundaries aren't getting any bigger, but the developed area in Edmond is getting bigger. So you have some pretty significant capital improvement needs, and a lot of those are around traffic and transportation, street improvements, intersection improvements, things like that. When I went around and talked to people, they said the most complaints I get are about streets, or I really wish Edmond would do something about their streets, or just comments like that. So my recommendation to the city council was that they call an election in November to make the 1 penny sales tax permanent and to have a general obligation bond authorization on the ballot for infrastructure. My recommendation is that it focus on street improvements, but that's really for you all to decide and solely for you all to make a recommendation to the city council, who will make obviously the ultimate decision. Staff has provided you, I think, with a list of projects, and those will get talked about in more detail. But some of the things that you'll be looking at is that list of projects, where they're located. We'll be talking about what is the appropriate mill levy, so how high of a tax rate is Edmond going to be comfortable with? And how often would you issue or go out to get an authorization for general obligation bonds from your voters? So I'll give you an example from Oklahoma City. In Oklahoma City, in 1989, we made a decision to set our target mill levy at 16 mills. And we issue bonds they go out and ask the voters for a new authorization roughly every 7 to 10 years, depending on when they kind of issue all those bonds and need to fill the pot back up. So that's been how it's functioned in Oklahoma City. We have data about some other cities in the state that we'll look at. But what you all will be charged with is kind of wrestling those issues to the ground and making a recommendation to the city council. So with that, I think
We'll bring Pat.
we'll bring Pat McFerron up to talk a little bit about some polling that was done by the Alliance 2050 a few months ago that kind of gives us a little bit of at least a glimpse or a framework in which to think about some of these issues about capital improvements and what the voters are thinking about.
Great, thanks. While he's getting the technology here, just give you a little background. This was a survey that was commissioned. It was done last fall, so it's a little bit dated, and it was done with a little bit of a different view. And I realize these are some of the issues you're not necessarily talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about, I think, the temporary economic development sales tax, but I just want to give you an idea of where the voter attitudes were about what's going on in Edmond, tax sensitivity, some other issues as you're putting things together here. So hopefully we'll get things going here just a little bit. As we do this, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the data when we get to that point. And I can put this in context. I'll do this in a number of different communities across the state and across the country where we're looking at these kinds of issues. So looks like we're ready to go. As you can see, the survey was conducted last fall, October, and in November. 350 registered voters in the city of Edmond, just to see the geographic disbursement by wards. This is reflective of what would generally happen in a November election, and so it's geared toward that. In that situation, about 38% of the voters are going to be over the age of 65. They vote so much more frequently, even in a community like Edmond, where so many people are, where it's younger than it's much younger than the state is as a whole. The state will be north of that. Edmond is generally a very affluent community. You can see a third of the voters say they live in households with an income of more than $150,000 a year. Skews a little bit female. People always ask how you reach people. Most of it is live agents. A quarter is text to web. 54 people reach on live mobile phones with live agents. We do all our calling from here in Oklahoma. Party registration again reflects the electorate. 59% registered Republicans. And we did ask how long have you lived in Edmond. Roughly half the respondents have lived in Edmond for more than 20 years. We were looking at park usage, and you can see that we do have 27% that say they use a park on a weekly basis, another 18%, 45% at least monthly, and then we have others at less than once a year. And you can see if it's under 45, usage is really, really high, but even among seniors, those over 65, you have 29% using parks on a monthly basis. I'll tell you, compared to what I've looked at in other communities, this park usage is higher than what I tend to see. Clearly something that, an amenity that the folks in Edmond care about. And one of the challenges just as you're putting together a campaign, and that's what this was originally done for, I realize that's not your purposes here today, but is that we were looking at, generally older people are the ones that are voting, they're the less likely to use these quality of life amenities at times. And so we actually looked at the different aspects here, and you see how much the Mitch Park trails are used by even 63% by those under 45. Those under 45 use it, but it's still 27%, which is a significant number among those over 65. And you can see some of the other projects you have and amenities you have here. This is the right track number about the direction of the city of Edmond. I've done some previous surveys. It seems like it's every 7 years or so. We do something here, and you can see it's 55-30. These are the most negative, or I should say it this way. These are the least positive numbers I've seen. I will tell you, if you looked at this on a statewide basis, you'd be almost the inverse of this. High 30s right track, low 50s wrong track. If you looked at the nation among people in Oklahoma, you're closer to 85% wrong track. So it's all a matter of perspective. I have seen most communities recently have a little bit of a slide when you look around. So I don't know that that's a real concerning number there, but still very positive. And so people are, when you see this, I tend to think that people are ready to invest in the community even more. You do see one of the things that's even though this is more of a Republican community, the Republicans are still positive, the Democrats are positive. It tells me that you don't have as much partisanship here as you do. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm a Normanite, and I can tell you, Republicans and Democrats in Norman don't agree on anything. And so that's a lot different than what you guys have here. You should be, thankful and grateful for that. I think to a great extent that you don't have that same division we have in other places. And I will tell you, generally, if you look across the nation, it's different than what we see here. You do see those over 65 and lower income, a little more concerned, a little less optimistic. I'll tell you the focus group work, the other survey data I'm doing, when I look at that group, that really has nothing to do with Edmond. It has to do with inflation. Those are the groups that are most hit by inflation right now, and especially where we were last fall. So I think it has more to do with the national economy and other issues than it does anything you need to deal with here in Edmond. There is no doubt, when you ask people what's the most important issue facing Edmond, it's infrastructure. And I know there's some in here that have heard me say this before. When you ask voters what they mean by infrastructure, it's streets, number one. It tends to be roads, number two. Highways, number three. Streets, number four. Potholes, number five. And then they'll eventually get to water and broadband. But it is all about streets and roads and traffic. That is really what's dominating here. You see a little bit overdevelopment, not really as much as I see in other suburban communities. And there's the word wall, and you can see it's traffic. Is really what their concern is. And as someone who doesn't drive up here very often and left downtown at about 5 after 5 and was worried I wasn't going to get here on time, I can understand that today. But you see, here's roads, infrastructure. We do see housing is something new that's happening a little more concerned about that. See that across the country, across the state, and it's important here as well. So, as I said, the survey was done when we were looking at the half-cent economic development sales tax, and this is just a good barometer for tax sensitivity, which I'll tell you don't have really at this point when it comes to this. 79% said they would favor extending that half-cent sales tax, only 17% opposed, 54% definitely in favor. You see 92% among registered Democrats, but 72 to 23, better than 3 to 1 among Republicans. We asked people why they favor it. It enhances the community. It's needed for youth and animals. It's not a new tax. And so these were all issues that were very, very strong. But really, what I would say is that people want to do it because they love Edmond. You can sell Edmond, make Edmond the star if you're doing a campaign. And you can see there, Edmond's a good community that needs this. That would be the summation about why people will do the half-cent sales tax. Those who opposed it are people who think taxes are too high. And again, remember, this is only 17%, so there's not much here. So that's 30% of 17. So you're talking about 5% of all voters represent that. And there you can see it's just, there are some that say I'd rather spend on infrastructure or water, but it's really about taxes and just anti-government at any level. We did ask, and this is one thing I do think you'll have to take into a little bit of consideration as you're looking at, I guess you guys aren't the ones doing it, but as the city looks at the 1 cent sales tax, folks like temporary things. They tend not to like permanent. So this was just why we asked why you favor the half cent. And the reason I think this is important, because you can see the things that are important to people as well as you're looking at your GO bond issues. Tell them it's not a tax increase. It's actually very important, as you might expect. But it's not overwhelming. If we just say it's to maintain our investments we've already made, people like that. That's a very strong message. I'll tell you that we've done general obligation bond issues in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Tulsa's the most recent place where I did that. And that was our number one message. This isn't anything new. This is just maintaining what we have. And it really resonates with folks that they don't want to let things go into disrepair. They want to make sure things are maintained. Actually, that's almost as important as it not being a tax increase. Animal service, trash trucks, these kind of things, very popular. Trails, parks. And then you can get into some other messages, improve our home values, those kind of things. Still very positive, 67 to 26. I should explain this chart a little bit. This is so I can agree with all of this, so I can compare them to each other. So this is if I tell you this, will that make you vote yes or no? And so the top one there is 79 to 17. So we're over here at 62 positive, net positive there. But what I would say is that really the more you talk about details you get to a campaign, the more trouble people have. You want to keep things at a higher level when you're doing that messaging. And then some of this here is just other messaging. I'll kind of get to that.
Question.
Yes.
Do you compare other cities? Do you tell them, your neighbor Norman is at this tax rate and you're at this tax rate? Is that
Sometimes I do. If we think it's going to be an advantage in different places, yes. Yeah. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So I will tell you that tends to become an excuse for no voters. If they say people are going to go to another community or something, but I don't think it really moves. It's not in my experience that moves voters' perceptions. It becomes a reason for why they're one way or the other. So then we ask, after we did that, ask them, where are you? And you can see it's still, the half cent is so beloved at 79%, it doesn't really change much. So now we'll go to, this was about bonds for infrastructure needs. Starts at 55.35. It is known that it's a property tax. It does start out positive, but you see Republicans are a little more narrow at 51 to 40. This would concern me in a real small turnout election. I think you want to have a larger turnout if you can. You do see that less than a majority of those over 65 are in favor of a bond issue election. If you were to have this as a March or February or some type of election there, kind of standalone, those over 65 will end up being more than half the people who actually turn out to vote. You can bring that number down if you have this in a November election. There's a little more opposition among the lifelong residents, but that's because they're going to be older too. You do see a real desire for your newer residents, and by that I mean people that have been here 11 to 20 years, to be supportive. And there is a correlation between the two. If you're in favor of the half cent sales tax, you're also in favor of the general obligation bond. If you're opposed to the half cent, you tend to be against it. So they will largely run in tandem. And so if you end up having two things on the same ballot, I don't see a concern there. Why do you favor it? Again, it's because they like Edmond and it's needed. But I will say that I think when you're talking about the property tax side, you need to have more specific in the sales tax. People take it more personally when they do the sales tax. But again, you see it's infrastructure, streets, roads. You do see sidewalks pop there. And why are you opposed? Again, taxes are too high. But even there, you see we need to spend more money on roads. And so if you can convince them it's roads, it's better. Some of the things that really popped on this, we tested on this, was if it led to safer school crossings, something that's a very big concern. 74% said that would make them vote yes. If you were able to expedite street repairs, so it's not only that people want good streets, they want them done quickly. And so and this is something that we were able to do in Tulsa, was a very key component there is streamlining the permitting process, incentives for getting it done quicker, getting things done. Very, very popular. And if you can make the claim that it'll reduce congestion, also very, very positive. You do see those more sidewalks here. It's 64-32, still good, but nothing like the streets and roads. And then to Bud's question there, If we talk about how Edmond's the largest city with no dedicated tax for these issues, it works 61 to 29, but it doesn't get you much higher than where you start. So your comparison of Edmond to other places not having this, and I don't care if you say it's the largest or the only city over 50,000 with no dedicated, it's basically the same number. And then your bike trails. And if we talk about how much it's going to cost a person, it's better to actually talk about $320 per year. I can't remember what value home we had there. I've got it in my questionnaire here. Is better than $26. So, just some of the other demographics, different things. As you might think, women are more concerned about safer school crossings than men, who I guess don't care. You can see some of those differences there. If you look at those that are undecided, you do see the revamping intersections pop a little bit, but still safer school crossings is the top issue for them. And they're the ones that are most concerned with the cost. And you do see seniors a little bit more concerned with cost than those under 45. So after we educate and talk to them, the numbers change a little bit. They go to 63% support, a 9-point net change. Non-Republicans move more than the Republicans do. So I would be concerned about a small turnout election. You're going to want a large turnout election. Ward 1 showed the most improvement. Opposition actually grows a little bit among those over 65 when you start talking about the capacity of it. In this case, again, I know this is nothing you're really looking at here, but if you were to have both of them on the same election date, the two that we discussed here, 49% said I'd vote for yes for both of them. 20% said they do support the sales tax, and 8% the sales tax only, 8% the bond issue only. So you get them both over 50 pretty easily. And you have that same 18% that's kind of going to be opposed to everything there. And what you need to do is make sure this 18% never becomes 50% of the people that vote. You do see a majority of those over 65 indicate that they would support the bond issue and also the sales tax that put together. So I realize it's a little bit apples and oranges. No, I think this is the first time I've ever presented in this kind of a format where I'm talking about things that you're not talking about. But I hope it gives you a little bit of a background for where the voters are, what their desires are, that they want streets and roads. They do like the amenities. They do like what's happening in Edmond. So I would say it's kind of, they want you to kind of keep the course and they're not afraid of investing.
So the time sensitivity for this is because we want to do this in November, when we have the highest turnout as opposed to the other elections? Is that kind of what's driving this?
I don't know. I haven't been involved in any of those discussions.
Oh, okay.
That seems reasonable to me, because I probably am an advocate for trying to have a high turnout election.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are coming up in 2025 that we have to kind of plan around. One of those is city council elections. So you wouldn't want to do this along with your city council elections,
Right.
because then it becomes an election issue. And then, frankly, in the fall, it looks like Oklahoma City is going to be doing a really big general obligation bond authorization that'll be potentially over $1 billion. So I think you want to get some separation between some of those issues. And as Pat said, I think there's some advantages to having it on a high turnout election.
And it's a question, and I appreciate Pat when we talked about this back in the fall. I'm not scared of the other elections that might happen. I think there's 8 or 10 dates a year you can do it. I heard what you said about not wanting a slow turnout. Is that how you attribute the 37% that opposed the hotel motel tax? It was really the most benign tax you can imagine that happened in Edmond last week.
Yes.
Just purely no tax people.
Right.
There's
Well,
no
you
opposition.
also had on a Republican primary ballot, which is going to be a little bit higher anti-tax. And so I would actually think you're pretty.
So that had 37% with no campaign that just says, I'm against tax. And it didn't impact anybody unless their relatives came to town.
Right.
And so now we're talking about adding a few $100 or maybe a lot of $100 to people. And you think that number is still manageable because you have a lot more people voting?
Yes. I think no voters, if you look at what's happened in the state in the last dozen years or so, the no voters stay, the number stays the same, largely the same. And so if you can grow the pie just participating, there'll be a smaller percentage.
Why does the Edmond Public Schools always do their bonds separate from the big elections?
I don't know, because they don't hire me, I guess.
They have 70 years of success.
They do, but like for Oklahoma City Public Schools, we've changed, we only do November elections now for Oklahoma City Public Schools for that reason. Because it's a different thing. I mean, Edmond has been built, as you guys know, largely because of the school system and everything else, and people that I think move to Edmond do so still more for the school district than happens in some other communities. And so there's a higher investment, so you don't have too much of a risk.
Were there any questions posed to the public on the effect of this against the school's millage? Because it's been like 7-Eleven and Quick Trip for all these years. The schools would work on millage, the city would work on sales tax. I mean, it's kind of like that unwritten rule that was always out there.
Yeah, no, we didn't ask the voters. I will tell you, I have done some focus group work before, and the voters don't care. They want streets, they want schools. And so what do they have to do to get that within reason, they're supporting that.
I know you poll a lot of people. I've been sitting in tax hearings for the last 3 months. I'm on the equalization board. There's a big underlying tone out there because everybody's getting hit with their insurance up at the same time and millage rate on Oklahoma County and everything. And it's
I think that
tripled the number of hearings we've had.
Yeah, I think that's why you see the bond issue start 10 to 15 points below where the sales tax is. Yeah, there is greater property tax sensitivity. Now, it's not where we were in the state in the 90s, but it is on the upswing, and so that's another reason why I'd say do it sooner rather than later.
I guess the last GO bond issue we actually voted on in Edmond was for the Public Safety Center, and that went down pretty substantial. Did you all look at that, or the impact of that, or did you do any polling for that particular election? I think it was, what was it, 16, 17?
The last survey I'd done was in 2015, so it might have been leading up to some of that. But I think I don't know how much that was about anti-tax and other issues, so I just don't have that recollection.
I have a question. I consider, to echo or say what you said in different words, for me anyway, the Edmond Public Schools is what brought me and many of us to the town and drives the value of homes, which we like. I consider it the goose that lays the golden eggs here in Edmonds, the Edmond Public School. And not only do they, being the Edmond Public School, but citizens pretty jealously protect that. And the only source of funding they have is the ad valorem tax, and the city doesn't yet have. I'm wondering if the city decides to try to pass a GO bond, which I consider a heavy lift, by the way, if they start fishing out of that same pond, whether that is going to, one, fail, two, cause the school thing to fail, and shoot us all in the foot in the process.
Well, I mean, I don't know that my polling data can answer that. What I would say is that most communities across the state, I mean, Norman's another one, I mean, they do both. Oklahoma City does. In fact, you're the largest community in the state that doesn't do that. And I think Norman would say that their education and their school district is similar to what you have here. You see it with Jinx, you see it with other communities as well. So, hey, Edmond's unique, it's different. I don't have polling data there, but I would say you could look at other communities and see that it does. I think they have synergy there. And don't get me wrong, there's always discussions with your career techs and others, with their, especially their feeding superintendents when they decide to do something.
You have an opinion, Pat? I really appreciate your expertise. So if this election's the first week in November and 30 days later, there's filing periods for city council and mayor, and if for some reason the GO bond gets beat, do you have an opinion how that might impact the motivation of the people filing going forward?
No, it could happen in a variety of different ways. If that would happen, you could have people get upset that the leadership didn't sell the right package and we're not getting the streets we need. You could have other people that said the leadership failed us for something else. I mean, my experience is that people that want to run for office will find an excuse and a reason to justify it no matter what that situation is.
I appreciate the perspective. I was curious. I mean, I think you get your ass beat in November and all of a sudden you run out everybody that was there with a whole different mentality. That concerns me.
Yes.
Curious.
But I think it can happen even if it's successful too. When you have something that's not real. And I will tell you, when I look at the concern about the city of Edmond and streets and infrastructure here, I'd almost be more concerned about, I think there's a risk of doing nothing as well.
I mean, it seems like a big part of our job as a task force is gonna be to sell this thing. I mean, whatever plan that we approve is gonna be incumbent on us as kind of the subject matter experts to get out there and kind of give the justification so that people will say, yes, we wanna do that.
Yeah, I think that our task here should be separated from possible election or re-elections of our city council. We're grown people, they can defend for that if they want. I mean, I really like the city council mayor we have now. I've lived here 40 years. And I think they'll do okay myself. But I don't, vote Ward 4. But we're here to help the citizens and not worry about politicians.
Can I ask one more question to Edmond Schools? Can you get their endorsement for this?
Yeah, I'm not, my experience on this was doing this survey in October of last year, and then Kathy called me a month ago after the report.
I can speak to that.
But I mean,
I can speak to that. The school will not oppose it or anything like that. They will not speak ill of the GO bond.
So is that an endorsement?
I would not go that far. I think that's why we're on this task force to figure that out.
So Marcus, is that true regardless of the number of mills? If it's 15 mills, they're good with it. If it's 8 mills, they're good with it? Is that what you're saying? I'm just curious.
I can't speak for the other board members and or the superintendent.
You just said they wouldn't oppose it, so I was curious.
They're not gonna support it, but they're not gonna oppose it.
I guess I'm really
They're not gonna speak out in one way or another.
I guess I'm really hoping that this committee comes together and figures out a way that this, if we choose to go forward with it, is a good thing for the schools and not in competition with the schools. It's a good thing for Edmond, it's a good thing for all kinds of people, but there's gotta be something in it for everybody to get there. So,
Safer school crossings.
And that's why I'm here, because I agree with you.
but roads need to be improved in front of the schools before you build the school.
It is definitely gonna be a heavy lift, I think, because if we pass a GO bond, the next board, or the next school bond will definitely be one that if you're anti-tax, someone's gonna go and vote anti-tax and potentially would fail. And if we fail a school bond, that really puts the district in some very bad situations when it comes to financial situations.
And one of the things, the way it's set up now, if we had a November election, you don't get the money right away, you get it basically in the next year when it's taxed. People would be getting their tax statements in December and would be voting the bond election for the schools in February. So that would be very fresh on somebody's mind.
But yet the schools are structured so that there isn't technically a tax increase, right?
Right.
So,
Unless you change the millage, right?
Yeah, for the 20 years I was doing it, we kept it between 24 and 25 meals concept. If your taxes went up, it's because the value of your house went up.
Well, let me ask a money question. How many mills generates how many dollars?
Well, that's the thing on me. Thank you for that segue. All right, so we're gonna bring up the experts on that subject. So we've got Al Brooks and Chris Gander. I don't know which order you guys are going in and what you're handling. So yeah, we'll put that up on the yes. Yes, they got that, and we'll put that up on the screen. So Chris, you can pull that. So you want to show that? Sure. Okay.
So I'm Chris Gander with BOK Securities, and this is Alan Brooks, Public Finance Lawyer. So we represent the city with different financing needs and other cities, school districts. And in fact, we also represent Edmond School District, Moore School District, Middale School District, and those towns as well. And so back to the point over here, most of the schools and towns work together. It's like we're all in one boat, and they may not come out and broadly support it, but it's also, once it's in place, it's easy to maintain. So I can't go back and say, what year they got, the city got their first mill levy in place, but once it's there, there's just no issue. They kind of help support them. So it's a bigger step to get that first tax in place. So with that.
We're getting there, this is not cooperating tonight, sorry.
But while he's doing that, we're not gonna get too in the weeds on kind of the structuring of GO bonds. But the way it works is you authorize a certain, or the city does, passes a dollar. So opposite of sales tax, you say, hey, we're gonna get a penny, and it's gonna generate a certain amount of money, and then we figure out how much money you can borrow based on that revenue stream. Where with the GO bond, we authorize a dollar amount, $100 million, $150 million, and then that drives the tax rate. So we have kind of a line of credit that we can issue bonds, and so each year what we do is say, okay, if our target is 15 mils or 10 mils, how many bonds do we issue this year to maintain that tax rate? There's no way for us to go out and say, we want 15 mils or 10 mils. We basically say, okay, to do that, we're gonna issue this number of bonds. So what happens is, probably with inflation, the value and with growth is gonna go up every year. And then by law, you have to have level principal payments on bond issues. So which means your first payment's your biggest payment, your second payment's your next biggest payment, right? So your debt service payment on every bond issue is going down, and what you're dividing that amount against is always going up. So your tax rate every year goes down, down, down. So all these school districts, most school districts, to maintain a steady tax rate, issues bonds each year. So all of our models, what we're doing here is issuing bonds that are 5-year maturities, very short maturities, and then issuing bonds every year. So you do election, back to what Kathy said, is Oklahoma City does a 7-year, 10-year cycle. So it's like, okay, we're gonna issue about $15 million of bonds every year for the next 10 years. So there's $150 million. You go out, get $150 million authorization, and then you issue the $15 million every year. But if you have lower growth, or the interest rates go higher, instead of issuing the $15 million, maybe you just issue $10 million. So you can keep basically that promise. So they're called unlimited tax GO bonds because there's really not a limit to where that tax rate can go, but all communities are kind of obligated to keep what they communicated to the voters. So in this case, if you guys came up with a recommendation, it's gonna be 10 mils, every year we're gonna recalibrate to try to hit that mill. And it's gonna be an average. I mean, sometimes we're gonna be a little bit high, sometimes we're gonna be a little bit low, and it's the exact same thing the school district does. Now the school district and the VOTEC and the county, they all get operational levy as well, but they also have the bond levy that gets recalibrated each year, and they issue the bonds to manage that. So just, ballpark numbers here. So we're saying 5 years. So if you issue bonds, and we're saying we'd issue bonds every year for 5 years. At 10 mils, you'd get $72 million. And then you go to the far right, let's go 10 years at 20 mils, you'd have $308 million. And I think, one of those things to think about, especially with the kind of inflation we've had lately, is, that's $308 million. So, when you're looking at project lists, you really need to think about, if you're building something 10 years from now, and that costs $10 million today, well, that thing's probably gonna cost $15 million in the future. So just in the sense of sometimes people don't take that into account when they're doing their planning. And then, once again, these are real, we're making assumptions on what your NAV growth rate's gonna be, we're making assumptions on what interest rates are gonna be. So they're ballpark numbers, and then once again, it'll be recalibrated each year. And then estimates on, and this apparently was the average home value in Edmond of $304,700. So that's how that got on there. But $100,000 home on 10 mils, your annual increase would be $100. On 15 mils, it's pretty simple because it's 11%. So if your market value is 100,000, there's a ratio you hit, and then with a homestead exemption, you get $1,000 knocked off. And so that math comes out real easy on $100,000, but it's approximately 10%. So then you can see 304. So on the average home in Edmond, if you're doing a 15 mil increase, it's $487.76. And Kathy will get into this, I think, but the communities around here, I don't know, we have the screen that shows the other communities that. I think that's and we, a lot of times we don't show the sales tax, we're just generally talking about GOs, but back to, this is just by population. And so you see Oklahoma City, and they're, every year, they may be low one year and high the next, but their target's 16. So their 1 point is probably because we had so much NAV growth in the sense we had inflation. So everybody's, it's not just property taxes might have gone up, but the value of your home went up. So that's kind of a sticker shock. So that may be why they were low. Tulsa, 15.3, Norman, so you can see, and I mean, Yukon has been higher at different times. They've kind of done some big projects and we're closer to 20, and then they never got on that, we're gonna issue bonds every year. And they've tried to get some GO bonds passed and had some failures, I guess, the lack of a better term. Moore's pretty, but 15, I mean, as you can see, that's kind of that, I think Oklahoma City kind of set that tone with 16 mils, and that's just kind of where everybody's kind of shot. I mean, some are lower. I mean, I know Lawton, their target is right at 11, and they've stuck with that for many years. So, and then the reason we brought the sales tax in is because some people, is it apples to apples? Is it fair to say Oklahoma City has 16 mils, but what does their sales tax look like? So, if somebody asks that, what is Oklahoma City? I mean, their sales tax is higher too. They're 4 and an 8 versus Edmond's 3.75, and they're having once again, their target's 16 mil levy. So I mean, that's a whole lot of extra revenue on the sales tax side and on the operational levy. So you can see Edmond's pretty low on the sales tax as well. So I don't know, is there any questions? That's the main question was how much, how many mills and how much does it generate for projects, and that was.
This is a stupid question. The previous slide, does it matter what the AM schedule is based on the tax per year?
Yeah, we could go longer. I mean, like I said,
I wasn't trying to go longer, but does it matter if I have a $304,700 house? If it's a 5, 7, or 10 year deal, does that not move that number?
I'm not sure I'm following.
No, because you're trying to keep the mill levy the same.
Okay, I was asking out of ignorance. So my tax rate, no matter whether it's a 5, 7, or 10 year ask, is still tied to the millage rate without a repayment number.
Because we would change the size of the bonds because you changed the term. So it's basically
gross
get
number,
back.
not a tax number.
Sometimes I say with GO bonds, it's kind of a tail wags the dog. Back to that, we don't get to like say, hey, we're gonna levy 15 mils. We have to recalibrate. So if there's a certain project that they had to have you had to have a certain amount of money to build a new fire station. And the 15 million that year, and so we need $30 million that the city can encumber, then maybe we'd say, okay, well, instead of doing this 5-year, we're gonna do a 7 or 8 year so we can go ahead and get that $30 million today, but then we're probably gonna have to skip a year or two to get there to offset that. So it would change if we kept the same amount, but since we would recalibrate how many we issue to keep it, or we communicate to the voters you wanted it.
But your NAV is the biggest factor.
The NAV, yeah, that's truly the big one. I mean, we're using pretty conservative. We're using, I mean, the average in Edmond for the last 20 years is just right at 6% is what your NAV growth has been. And we're using 2.5% in our projection. Because we'd much rather be able to issue more than we projected, or like an under promise and over deliver kind of concept. So we're very conservative on our expected growth rates.
So what was the shortfall the mayor said again? Was that about 250 million? What was it?
3 something.
It's about
350.
350, all right.
So what do you recommend?
I mean, that's not really a recommendation. I mean, that's like, this is for you all to go. I mean, but I mean, I would just personally, I mean, obviously the starting point is kind of look where these other communities are. I mean, you don't want to be an outlier, you know, the highest tax rate, push people, you know, it's somewhere in that range. And so, you know, if you ask me, I think 20 is too high. I don't want to say that. I mean, if everyone said, hey, we got to have these projects, then maybe it's not. But, you know, I think that's too high. And if you're going through this, I mean, this is a major process. So it's like you want to get enough to make it worthwhile. So maybe 5's too low, right? So I would put it somewhere in that, you know, range of where these other like communities are.
Chris, are you hearing do you know any information about some of these looking to go up?
So Lawton passed another one, but we're going to keep the same mill levy. Stillwater is definitely looking at doing more. Moore's target is above 16. They're just a little bit lower. Same thing. I mean, once they're in once they have that levy, they just keep it there. So like, you know, they had an underpass, Moore did for the railroad tracks. And it's like, but they're so far behind with ODOT and Burlington Northern. It's like they've still got $20 or $30 million from an election from 2018, but they don't want so then they authorized a animal shelter. But they don't have to go out and do a huge one because it's like everybody's like, oh, you're paying 16 mil, so yeah, no problem. We'll sign up for an animal shelter now. But it's getting the right project to get it set up the first time.
Josh, I can tell you, Oklahoma City was, when they were going through their last bond stuff, was talking about wanting to raise the mill, but then the political will was
Too
the
risky.
easy button just to leave
Too
it
risky.
alone, and then you get to advertise it as a new tax, and
Yeah.
it's a continuation.
Yeah.
And so that's what we ran into in that conversation at that time.
So were there any, you mentioned UConn as a failure. Were there any other failures in any of those cities that you're aware of? Or do you remember?
It's been a while. I mean, Oklahoma City's had a really good track record. Alan, you know Norman?
Norman's a good record.
Yeah, Norman just passed something, didn't he? So this mill levy may not even reflect
Working there. So yeah, I mean,
those roads, yeah.
And Norman's a tough community to pass tax.
Yeah.
But again, Norman has had their tax load put about in the state fairly steady. It's been in place for a long time.
And bond votes for municipalities only have to have 50%.
That's correct. Yeah, and Alan's gonna get up and talk a little bit about more the legal side of it. It's a very regimented is the right word to say, but I won't. So I'll let him talk about kind of how it's approved and how it works when we issue the bond. We'll all stop. I mean, does anybody have any more questions on the kind of the sizing or how the tax rates work? Before Alan kind of talks about the legal side of it.
One thing, Chris, I mean, the argument for sales tax, as you know, is that it's paid by a lot of folks outside of the community. And that's kind of been the age-old argument. What are your thoughts on sales tax versus, you know?
I think one thing that's really tough, and I mean, I've never seen anything contrary. So I've heard this from Oklahoma Municipal League, and I know you have too, Rick, that Oklahoma is one of the only communities where municipalities don't have a property tax operational levy. So I'm kind of the diversification of revenues, right? I mean, it'd be nice to not have to go out every 7 years to reauthorize, but voters also, it's good to give them that ability to, okay, they didn't do what they promised, so we're gonna vote down the next, election. So I think because of the diversification away from, you're almost like a two-legged stool. I mean, you've got your utility system revenues and you've got your sales tax. And the sales tax you can't control. I mean, the economy goes down, it's just, your budget has to adjust with it, right? I mean, with utility rates, it's one, people are gonna keep my water, but two, you could raise rates if needed. And so it's nice to kind of have that third leg, particularly to pay for infrastructure like streets and things like that. So, good question. And I'm gonna plug Rick here. Rick did what I do for decades, so you have a subject matter expert right there. I've learned a lot from Rick over my career, so he owned a.
You wrote this document.
Which I think.
For the record, he wrote it, but I corrected it. I heard you made that comment, but this is a much improved version of that.
I have a question which is a conflict between you and Mr. McFerron, and that is there some correlation or difference? The higher the bond you ask for, the lesser approval that you have, or no? Or does it make any difference how much you ask for?
I think it'd be more the tax rate. The tax rate, and the longer it goes. I don't know if the size matters.
I think if you got, I think if you got outside of the range of what some of these other communities are, then your likelihood of not having a successful election goes up substantially. Unless there was just some extraordinarily popular project that was in the list that people voted for. I think there could be that.
That's a great question, actually, and I'm just saying Oklahoma City Schools, and you helped with the polling on this, I believe, but because Oklahoma City had just passed a was a county, but Oklahoma City was basically, we were told, do not, and they were trying to raise their mills substantially. They're substantially lower than all the other school districts, and so they were going from like 18 mils to 28 mils, substantial. And they said, do not go over $1 billion. So it was like a $990 million because it was polled poorly if we broke $1 billion. I'm not saying it's $100 million a year for 10 years, but approximately. I mean, that's a good point. It's a real good question.
What I'm hearing is that our sweet spot ought to be somewhere between 10 and 15 mils. Is that what I'm kind of, or is that what you guys heard?
Well, I think that's for the committee to discuss, and we're gonna look at a project list and do a little bit more, looking at the numbers, but, I think, what Alan and what Chris was saying and what we know from these other communities is that I think between 10 and 15 mils is what you're looking at.
Yeah, if I could add just a little bit there, what I would say is that, as I've done polling on different things, yes, there are some critical things like the $1 billion and things like that, where there are places where voters change. But I would let the policy drive it, not the politics. If you've got a good package, you can sell it even if it's a higher price. It's been my experience on it. So it's about the package you guys are putting together as much as it is the price on the other side.
Can I ask one question on this sheet where it says each category group of projects must be presented as a separate proposition? What if half fail and half pass?
Well, I mean, so like from a practical standpoint, from a policy perspective, let's say you had 5 propositions on the ballot for GO bond projects, and if you issued all of those over the time period that was proposed and you could keep it at 15 mils, your target was 15 mils, even if only 2 of those passed, you'd still keep your target at 15 mils. You just go back out quicker back to the voters to ask for a new authorization. Does that make sense?
In regards to that, I read the same thing. This whole list of proposed projects or sample projects that we're looking at, would that be all in one category and one bond?
So we're gonna talk about that. Let's talk about the legal requirements really quick, because there are some, and I'm just gonna make like an editorial comment about general obligation bonds compared to sales taxes, frankly, is that the level of accountability attached to a general obligation bond election and authorization is much higher than it is to a sales tax approval, because we have to list the projects, at least 70% of them anyway. So Alan's gonna talk about that, but in my opinion, this kind of voter accountability is much higher with a GO bond authorization than it is with a sales tax, which, frankly, can be changed by the city council on any council.
Okay, my name's Alan Brooks, I'm the Public Grants Law Group, and I too spent a lot of time with Rick. Why are we having this conversation? And one thing to keep in mind is that we talk about school districts, how they have operational levies and building fund levies. Cities can use ad valorem taxes, they can tax us ad valorem taxes for 2 purposes. 1, voted GO bonds, or 2, judgments, okay? No, there is no operational levy out there that's available. That's the 2 ways in our Constitution that you can access ad valorem taxes. And I think, again, this conversation was all started because more and more cities are looking at expanding that base of revenue beyond sales tax and utility revenue. So this is the logical other place. You can see a lot of large communities do it. Your big issue here is getting that first one done, okay? I mean, I don't think, is it 10 mils, 15 mils? I think, in my opinion, that's kind of the range we're talking about. But the question is, how do you get the first one done? Because after that, it gets a lot easier. As an example, if you picked 12 mils as your target, and you get that approved by voters, it's a whole lot easier to go from 12 to 14 than it is to go from 0 to 12. So I think that's critical in this process. You want to put this sheet up, everybody has, do you have this?
I do not.
Everybody has this sheet.
But everyone has a copy.
No problem.
Yeah.
And
Rick is correct, he did, I think he did right there. So, but I'm not gonna go through every bit of this, okay? Just kind of hit the high points. We talked about, one of the questions was, what's the vote that's required? I mean, the geo bonds have to go to the vote of the people. We're talking typically, okay, here, about bonds that are gonna be issued under Article 10, Section 27 of the Oklahoma Constitution. Under Article 10, Section 27 of the Constitution, you can issue bonds for what are broadly described as public utilities, okay, that are owned exclusively by the city. The Supreme Court in Oklahoma has interpreted public utilities, the term very broadly. Parking lots, parks, those are public utilities for this purpose, okay? Broad list has been vetted out by the Supreme Court over the years. What is a public utility? Again, to be owned exclusively by the city. And then the second component of projects under Article 10, Section 27 are roads, streets, and bridges. As a general rule, roads, streets, and bridges are not owned exclusively by the city. They're owned by the abutting property owners, okay? So they carved out and added to public utilities, roads, streets, and bridges. Most everything we're talking about tonight is going to fall in that category, okay? There's two other articles of the Constitution we might get into later, but as a general rule of thumb, that's what we're talking about. Public utilities, broadly construed, roads, streets, and bridges. Those all are basically a 50% vote versus schools, which is a 60% approval. I mean, that's one significant leg up the city has over school, that cities and towns have over school districts. It's a 50% vote, okay? So we've got that issue. We talked about
what about future right of way? Is it allowed?
To buy land? Is that what we're asking? Not to, I mean, short answer is if it's land that's gonna be owned exclusively by the city in connection with one of these projects, it would be an eligible. So we have right of way. I mean, I'd
Say eligible, ineligible.
Pardon, would be eligible.
Would be eligible.
But again, I mean, you're probably not gonna go out and use, I don't know, are we talking about new roads in any of these
Yeah, I
categories?
think you have to be kind of more specific, like, we're gonna go by right of way to extend a road, then the project that would be listed is extension of CoAlign, the blah, 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 I don't, I'm.
Jay brought this up to me and I thought it was kind of fascinating, because it makes sense in a lot of ways. If you had, say, like a transportation plan, and for future, and is not one of these projects, but you do it, you're bonding some money to go buy right away for that future to get it at a better price today.
You get the reward, I've never heard that question come up.
It's Jay. Yeah, it's Jay.
Thanks,
He knows how much,
He knows how much
right
Coffee
away.
Creek, and he's worried about you buying his land.
You rarely have enough money to do what you need to do today, period. So you don't think about buying for the future very often. Our schools are pretty good about identifying projects multiple years in advance.
We've done it for fire stations, they do it for schools.
And you can identify, land acquisition for a new fire station in the vicinity of blah, 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 and put that in a GO bond authorization. Land acquisition for a new park at such and such location and put it in a bond authorization. I don't think you can just, I've never heard of anything like just land acquisition in general.
Or right of way acquisition.
Or right of way.
Identify a
Yeah,
corridor.
that's even
It's
more.
more expensive.
Yeah, well, I understand.
So the part here where it says, each category or group of project must be presented as a separate proposition, does that would just say roads is one, quality of life is another, or do we list each individual project in there for the ballot?
Well, the answer is both, okay? So, I mean, as an example, it sounds like it's almost a foregone conclusion, there's gonna be a road, streets, and bridges proposition included here. That seems to be the hot button and the thing that Edmond voters want to see. So we would have a proposition for roads, streets, and bridges. We'd probably make it broad enough to say things like including signalization, landscaping, anything that would be kind of a part of roads, streets, and bridges. But then we would have to identify with some specificity where at least 70% of those roads, streets, and bridges for that money to be spent under the statutes that kind of construe these provisions. There's what's called the Bond Proceeds Act. And under the Bond Proceeds Act, we have to identify with some degree of specificity, we're gonna do Broadway extension from 15th to 33rd, as an example.
Is that our committee job to figure out the wording on that, or is that somebody on the city staff?
No, that's not you won't.
We just pick the
Staff
projects
and,
and then
staff
someone
and
else does the
lawyers
work.
will do
Okay.
that.
But you would identify those
Yes.
as an example. Roads are one of our projects, and these are the roads, I think, that's what this committee will tell us, is these roads are what. Yes, sir.
But 30%, I know if I get to talking about this at the Cox Barbershop or some barber shop, what, they'll say, well, where's the 30% go?
30% has to be used within that same category, roads, streets, and bridges. The reason, I mean, some communities we work with will identify 100% of the proceeds are going okay? The downside of that is that once you identify those projects, you need to do the projects, okay? And so as you have things that change, it's nice that you can have a little cushion there. It doesn't have to be 30%.
So it's wiggle room.
Might be 20%.
Wiggle room.
Wiggle room. 'Cause again, I mean, we're talking about projects that might be done over 6, 7, 8 years, and it'd be nice to have a little, I mean, in that description where we describe the project, we would typically also describe the dollar amount associated with that project that would add up to at least 70% of the total proceeds.
Do you have the 85% requirement too in municipal bonds where you have to spend
You have to spend
85% of that?
You have to spend that unless you can basically accomplish the project otherwise, and, I mean, short answer is. Yes, sir.
One of the things that really sold, in my opinion, maps, Oklahoma City capital projects, was a citizens oversight committee. So that the voters had some confidence that they had some kind of input rather than who knows who's deciding this. On municipal bond, can you make a citizens oversight committee a condition or a part of it?
So if it's a policy decision, you could do that. I mean, again, you're gonna have a lot of oversight statutorily. In other words, you don't have the room to stray as much from the GO bond. That's, I think, a policy decision. Certainly you can do a citizens committee if it makes sense and you wanted to do that.
I'm curious on Jay and Josh's question on the right of way. And we have a master transportation plan where we identify areas. And I guess this is for later, but it's relevant to me right now, so I apologize. But if somebody in the room decides and the committee decides, hey, I think 33rd and Post makes sense to do infrastructure improvements. And it's not on the list that's already been provided to us. And I don't know how you get one on the list and figure out what it costs between now and November, but that's probably for a later discussion. But so then right-of-way acquisition for future, because right now you have 33 feet of right-of-way from the center line. So that can be part of that overall concept.
Again, I like to look at that a little bit in terms of just buying right away. I mean, because you're not, I mean, I like to look at that.
And I think
we haven't done that anywhere that I can think of where we use proceeds just to buy right away. Because somebody saying, so you've got right away, that's great, but I still don't sure that.
And I guess, and maybe I'm silly about this, but we have this East Edmond long-range plan that's part of our plan that identifies commercial corridors as far as our future development.
Mm-hmm.
We have some knowledge that OTA is going to go to Post and put an exit ramp. And so we do know that there's certain things that are in play based on a lot of smart people that spend a lot of time coming together with ideas.
Right.
And so if it's relevant to do that and it makes sense to do that, it seems like that would be something we want to consider as far as how you might spend those dollars. I know it's not always the first issue, but that's all we're talking about today for these meetings. So it seems, again, I'm a simple person, but it seems that might be a relevant analysis that takes place if you're knowing that's going to happen, at least based on the knowledge you have in front of you. The long-range plan, master transportation.
If we could do it, capital,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I don't disagree with you, but it makes sense. I mean, again, property's gonna, getting that right away is gonna be cheaper now than it's gonna be later. I think, again, I'm not a politician in the room, but I think the thing that's gonna trip, what triggers the voters is not as much, when are you gonna fix my street or my congestion that I'm dealing with today? And unfortunately, our number is such a big number to hit that. I think to get, at least get this first one passed, it might make sense to focus on, I'm getting out all that.
So I wanna know what Kathy.
CIP fund, if we leave the CIP from some of this stuff, and that'll be the area to do that.
I love Kathy's intelligence about this, because part of my thought is, part of the idea of infrastructure through geo bond financing in my simple mind again is to get ahead of congestion, get ahead of the development, so you're not always playing catch up. I mean, we know West Edmond's been subsidizing East Edmond's development for years, and so if you can get ahead of it because you have additional capital dollars based on future ad valorem revenue, that seems to me part of the idea. Instead of waiting for the retail to come after the rooftops get there, and then you're catching up the whole time.
And again, maybe a simpler way to get there, to do those same things, freeing up dollars that we were otherwise spending sales tax capital improvement dollars on, maybe use that for right-of-way acquisition, using geo bonds and have more restrictions on what we can do, what the Voters Act specifically approved, like that, again, get both things done and fund it, two different mechanisms. But again, we can look into that.
Alan, Casey, Kat, I'm jumping ahead a couple of sheets to our project list, and there's 3 categories. It's streets, and then quality of life, and then public safety. Has that been deemed that those would be 3 separate ballot
I had looked at
questions?
certainly streets, public safety, and quality of life we have to look at in terms of.
Yeah, you might have to call quality of life parks.
Okay,
I mean, you may have to be a little bit more specific
Okay.
than just quality of life, because that
But
means a lot of different things to a lot of different.
right, but that would be a bucket on its own, or on a ballot,
Parcel,
or a zip code of its own on a ballot. And then public safety would be one of its own.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think these are all fire stations. In Oklahoma City, they do one for like police facilities and one for fire facilities. So
Okay.
they do separate propositions for each, but that's maybe just their past practice and the way they've always done it. You know, they
From a
do.
legal standpoint, we could separate them, if you thought that made sense, or we could combine them into a general public safety question.
So maybe that helps explain to the group that, about the different questions on the ballot. They just have to be in the same category. They can be of the same question in the same category, and then a different question for a different category.
Right, and we have to look at the individual projects as well, because and we had, Alan and I think kind of talked about this in another meeting. You have some projects on here for trails.
Right.
Trails are not parks. And
The
so,
issue with trails is usually, not always, but trails usually are not on property that's owned exclusively by the city. As an example, one of the trails propositions, I think, is on Corps of Engineers land out in the lake. Correct. So, I mean, if we had trails, those would need to be done, not even as an Article 10, Section 27 question. We've talked about the fact that those, if we did trails on property not owned by the city, there's a separate constitutional article, Article 10, Section 35, where we can levy up to 5 mills. Okay? And those projects, it would clearly fit in that category, and it would need to be separated out differently than parks.
So we potentially have 4.
and so this is like really technical legal stuff right now, so like projects at Lake Arcadia, where the city does not own the property, trails where you might just have an easement, would have to be done under a separate article of the Constitution than regular geo bonds. With the number of projects that you have, you may wanna just leave those off this time and use sales tax dollars or something else to do those projects. Much simpler.
That's very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about geo projects, and we ran into this in Oklahoma City many times, is the city has to have fee simple title to the property that project sits on. It can't be a lease, it can't be state property, the city has to own it. So,
Unless it's a road street bridge.
yeah, which is, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you over another question. And that is, I'm just gonna make up someplace. Colville and Coltrane, is an intersection. Everybody wants that fixed, and it's stupid expensive. And I bet I've seen 8 different numbers on how much it's gonna cost. And some of those maybe are scientific, some of those maybe just, stick a finger up in the air and guess. But when they go out for the bond, they say, oh, this is gonna cost, this is what we're gonna do. And then along comes ACOG and says, oh, well, you got enough points, now we'll pay this, and it only costs half as much as we, what happens to the rest? Or the reverse, we think ACOG's gonna come in, oh, they're not, now it's gonna cost 40 million. Oops.
That's the place where it's nice not to identify 100% of the projects. Leave some room for cost overruns and designate 75 or 80% of your projects. Again, have to designate 70, you can use that undesignated money to complete projects that came in over budget. And then the projects, you got those 70% identified for less money to your other scenario, that leaves other dollars available for those streets and bridges. In other words, you have to spend 85% of the money, but if you get, unless you get the project out for less money, then you can reallocate that to other bridge streets and bridges.
Even if they're not on the list.
Even if they're not on the list.
It still has to be bridge, streets, and bridges. If you can complete a project for less than what it's listed for, because ODOT comes in, or ACOG, or somebody comes in with some money, yeah, it just rolls into that 30% pot, which might even be more than 30% in that case.
Okay. This is working pretty well, but you always have.
Just so everybody knows, ACOG is a federal matching grant for a road project.
Thanks, Tom. These, I mean, again, you all have this list in front of you. I think most of you looked at it. Again, there's a process when you issue GO bonds. Once you, I mean, we have, in this particular situation, with the federal election in November, we have a 75-day notice period, okay, that we have to be, versus a typical election, you just have to file the election for 60 days in advance. This one's 75 days in advance, okay?
Alan, so, 75 days, the election's November what, 4th?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
that puts our filing date on August the 21st.
so there's not a city council meeting after July 8th until August 8th, right? So what was the date I heard?
So there is, in building this timeline, council has agreed to have a special meeting before that 21st. And if you all have this, that they would be able to authorize an election.
Listen, I'm in favor of bond financing. I think it's the way to go. And I think you just said there's 45 or 50 days, and Chris called it a major process. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand all the factors. I mean, I'm with you, I really am. I'm in favor of it. But I've got reservations about all the factors that were just identified in the last 45 seconds.
What was the date you said that the council would need that by? We had to file with the election board by August 21st, our deadline. And so what that means is the council has, prior to that date, has approved the ordinance or resolution calling the election, and they've identified where at least 70% of the proceeds within each of those categories are going to go. Okay, they're adopted, signed, sealed, and filed with the county election board. Right? It's in their time that they get information out of the grant, et cetera. But anytime we've got a federal election, it's 75 days instead of 60.
So playing back from that, when does the city need us to have this list done by?
So we'll get you that information. There's a whole timeline of that. The reason that this has been set up on this timeline was in the event council wants to call that election, they have that opportunity. If you notice, when you originally applied for this, the duration of this task force is until your job is complete or until the end of this calendar year. So if council decides we're not going to do that, they may want you to continue to meet and talk about this longer. So there's a provision in place for both scenarios.
After the election, then the process, then you have the ability to set a sale date. You go out, you set a date, you advertise in the paper, you competitively bid for the bonds, you put together a book or a transcript of the proceedings. That has to go to the Attorney General's office for review and approval. Once they give us an approval date, then there's a 30-day contestability period that runs, and after that period of time, we can close your bond, issue dollars, and the bank, and your funds are available.
What's the bond rating of the city?
currently, Chris, bond rating of the city?
So it's double A minus, but the GO bonds, would, I mean, each, it's a different security, so it could have a different rating. You normally, with any community, it kind of goes this order. The highest rating would be your GO, is unlimited tax GOs. Then it's utility system revenue, because you can always raise your rates. And then your lowest would be sales tax. A lot of times it's one notch for each of those. So if you're A with one, then you'd be A minus and then triple B.
And you expect these bonds to be bank qualified?
It's over, you gotta be under 10 million, so it wouldn't be. And that's not that big a deal these days, just because the tax rates are lower. So it's not as significant as it used to be.
But I mean, we have to aggregate not only the debt of the city, but the debt of the public trust. So again, highly unlikely that Edmond anytime soon is going to get a bank qualified debt.
What kind of rate should we expect?
We sold bonds for lots today, and they were 10 years, and the rate was 3.4%.
And you're thinking 5-year bond tranches here probably? Maybe.
Kind of an inverted yield curve, so I'm not even sure 5-year would be much lower than that. It might be right at the same.
And that's gonna be market driven each time you sell bonds. I mean, this is, the tax is an unlimited ad valorem tax, okay? We're targeting a middle levy, all right? But ultimately, you're gonna levy the tax that needs to be levied to pay that service on the bonds. See if there's anything else on this that's interesting. I mean, we've kind of talked about the process, what needs to happen, timing. Again, I think a big job of this committee is figuring out, you know, what is that? I mean, maybe I'm trying to summarize it here, but I mean, what is the tax levy that we're looking at? I think that's a big decision. And then how long is, you know, how long do we want to go out? Do we want to or 5, 7, 10, pick that number? I think the conclusion and the reason that the numbers you got didn't go out longer than 10 years, correct? I'm not looking at that sheet. That's a pretty long time horizon to plan for. So, I mean, we typically don't see doing longer than that. But again, trying to come up with that target and then start allocating the dollars. Once you decide on the mill levy and your term of your debt, which I think we're thinking, you know, 7, 10 is a good place to be. Then you need to say, okay, we have this many dollars. How do we allocate those dollars within these categories, and what are our priority projects? Somebody made a comment earlier, we want to kind of try to touch everybody. All right, you want to spend all of your project dollars in one quadrant of the city, because the other 3/4 of the city is going to vote that. Okay, so you try to pick projects that either impact the city as a whole or at least touch every area of the city you can.
So Alan, legally, how specific do you have to be? Like, we have a list here, we're gonna talk about in a minute, of 30 projects or so that are identified outside the scope of this group. So if this group comes up with projects, two questions, I guess. How do you get those valued in time for the city to approve them at a council hearing to be added to the project list? And 2, do they have to be?
Well, one, I think the value of the cost estimate on this list, the city's already done that.
But if we had additional items that this group decides, say it's not just the staff list, but it's what the citizens have come up with under their own initiative.
I think that that's a question somebody else on staff should answer.
It sounds like if that's not the answer, then the answer is, well, then this committee just prioritizes an already existing list. And I don't know what the role is with respect to that.
Well, again, I think you've got a fairly comprehensive list in front of you, but I think if the staff comes together, I think if you all come up with other projects based upon the information that staff has, I mean, it costs this much, you know, per mile to.
So that's enough specific information, that's my question.
As an example, we're not gonna be so specific and say 3-inch overlay. I mean, we're gonna say something to the effect of reconstruction or new street, all right, from so-and-so to so-and-so, and identify that where we're doing the work, okay? I mean, we have some communities who wanna be much more specific. They oftentimes paint themselves in corners doing that, but I think if we can describe, is this a new road? Is this reconstruction of an existing road? That's the kind of definition we need, not so finite as to say exactly what we're doing. Is that?
Well, just, yeah,
And I
you're in
think
charge of the
AC
specifics, and so I just want to know what the standard is. I'm just trying to follow that.
We can't say we're gonna do roads, streets, and bridges throughout Northeast Edmond. Okay, I mean, we need to identify places we're gonna do it. And with some, at some level, is this an expansion, a widening of an existing street? Is this a new street? Is this an overlay of an existing street? And I think staff can pull that information together. That's all.
Thank you.
So, other legal questions? Okay. Next on the agenda.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so next on the agenda is initial discussion. And the reason it says initial discussion is because these are targeted to be 2-hour meetings ideally. You've got 30 minutes left. You also have to elect a chair, you have to elect a vice chair, and ideally set at least a couple more meeting dates out sometime probably in early July. So the thought behind this was we provided you with a list, and that list was really correct. You were correct, Todd. That is a staff put together list. But if you look at the top of that, it says it is not a final list. It is not a fully comprehensive. What that is staff that are working in these areas. These are things that have been identified over the years. They're known needs. They're needs that we potentially already have estimates for. We may already have design work done. These are projects that ideally, hopefully, could be done within the time frame of the GEO bond. So that's why this was given to you as a starting point, so that you have lots of information to work from instead of just ground zero nothing. And so, yes, it is a fairly robust list, but I think everyone is opening to hear the ideas and wanting to know if there are things not on there that we can talk about, we can try to get information on and add that. So the thought is with meeting 2, these subject matter experts are really going to dive into these individual projects, talk through those, answer your questions. So with this initial discussion, it's really broader questions, more high-level questions about this initial project list, or if there's something that is not on that list, if you want to ask about why maybe that wasn't considered, we can dive into that. We probably have about 15 to 20 minutes or so for this section. One thing I do want to clarify that, and Todd asked about this in an email today, I'm glad that he did. In that list of streets and roads, there is one item that has an asterisk by it, and that is for overlay. And it has $20 million as a placeholder in there. We'll get into more about why that number was chosen. That is an annual cost. So whatever you decide for overlay is actually not, I think it says 330 million as the total for that category. That 20 million is not even part of that 330, because you would need to determine how much annually you would want to do for an overlay times however many years the bond issue is. So let's say you said it was 10 million and it's a 7-year. So then we would actually go in and plug in a $70 million number in that spot. So just so you know, that's the one outlier as far as how those things are figured within that list. I want to make sure that everyone knew that and understood that. Yes, Jim?
Will there be a time in this meeting or one of our future meetings to get educated on what is the city spending currently and where does that money come from?
Correct.
For these type of projects?
Yes, absolutely.
Just to help put this big dollar amount in perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So right now, all of those, Andy, you can speak to this. All of these projects like this tend to typically happen from capital improvement taxes, correct? And then a little bit some out of park tax. Yeah.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for your willingness to serve on this. My name is Andy Conyers. I'm one of the 2 assistant city managers of the city. And one of the things I get to do in my day-to-day activities is help with capital projects. So Casey is correct that the primary source of funding for these projects, again, when we talk about that gap, the 495 compared to the 158, is sales tax. So currently the city has 2 dedicated sales taxes for capital projects. One's a 3/4 cent that is perpetual, and then one's a 1/2 cent that Pat referenced before that has an expiration in March of 2027. And then we also have a park tax that goes towards capital needs meetings as well, and for the maintenance of the day-to-day tax, and that's perpetual as well. So sales tax is the source of revenue for projects like this.
So Andy, on, just like this for overlays, we're not looking at replacing the existing budget for overlays with this money. If we're spending $5 million a year now, are we going to put that available to other projects now and just use this, or are we gonna really get some overlay going in the city?
Yeah, I think the idea would be, this would be the source of overlay for this, and then we free up dollars in those CIP, which is sales tax, for other quality of life.
So we don't gain that much there.
Depending on what number you choose.
Right.
Yeah.
How much are you spending on overlay right now?
$5 million, approximately $5 million a year.
Annually?
Yes, annually, yes.
And what does the three-quarter tax bring in typically right now?
So it brings in $18 million a year.
And of that, approximately 75% are spent on the streets and roads and bridges.
Um, Yeah, so currently between, I don't know how much we want to get into this, but for the two dedicated sales taxes, it's projected to bring in $30 million next fiscal year. Of that, $12 million of that 30 is dedicated to paying back some of the debt that has been issued for other projects. So that leaves about $18 million for projects on an annual basis. To give you an idea about how far that goes, the AC Caplander baseball field complex, council is moving forward with a complete renovation of that project. That's a $17.5 million project. So there's all the funding right there on a yearly basis, just to give you an idea about how far that goes.
Is overlay specific enough for the bond issue, legal question?
We would identify where the overlays
What
would take
streets?
place.
Okay.
Which we have and I know, not trying to get too deep, but our engineering folks will share this. We actually have a full study going on citywide. You want to talk briefly about that, Steve?
Yeah, Steve Lawrence, I'm the city engineer. So a couple of months ago, we had a firm come and test every single street that the city maintains in the city of Edmond. We've done it in the past, we just haven't done it in the last 12 years, so we needed to update our data. So in the next couple of months, we should be getting all the data on each street. So what we have used to objectively select which streets get resurfaced and which ones don't. So we hear a lot from all the citizens that people in Edmond are not bashful to let us know. But Todd was talking about it, have our ear to the ground about projects. We have that every day. We are severely underfunded and on capital projects, and we have a lot of needs. We've done a lot of studies. We have a lot of ideas about what we need to do because those things have been sitting on the shelf for years. So, but yeah, as far as the street resurfacing, we should have up-to-date data and outline which roads we need to first and what.
I thought it was interesting, within one of these projects, the engineering identified under the assumption asphalt roads last 12 years, which is, I don't know that it lasts 12 years, but assuming it does, and we have $2.5 million budgeted for that, and that does 8 miles of lane a year, and there's 80 lane miles that are needed. So that's 10 times that, so that's a $25 million pie that's needed. To me, this thing's about messaging in the end when we get through. And I don't think we focus as much on levies, millage, because nobody's gonna get that. If the number one deal is roads and streets, this is the kind of thing that is messaged. You want this, this is what's needed to take care of it. And so the structure and so forth is important, but when it's messaged to the public and to people, I think this is the kind of stuff that we have to focus on, that kind of data.
Yeah, I agree completely, Phil. The list has to be sold to the voters and has to be needed and wanted. This may be something that can be provided for the next meeting when we go deeper into the projects. It was 2 or 3 years ago when City Council met with the school board members. And Steve Manick had a presentation prepared, and we were talking about our gap for road projects and intersection projects. And if I remember right, there were 10 or 12 total road projects, and I think all of them are here. And I remember, there were like 8 of them that were kind of starred to be around a school or impactful to a school. Could we pull that up again? Or could that be provided to us?
Yes, we can get that information,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Other broad questions related to this list? Yes,
Why didn't you prioritize the parks?
Brad, would you like to speak to that?
I think that's something difficult to objectively prioritize. It's like me saying that soccer is more important than baseball, or vice versa, or Mitch Park's better than Hinker Park. So we didn't put a priority on them. It's my turn, I can share my opinion if you want.
Yeah. Whereas with roads, you point to traffic counts, you point to conditions, all those sorts of things. Yeah. It's a good question. Any other questions on this? And so again, at the next meeting, it's the deep dive into this, and one of you will be running this meeting. So you'll get to enjoy that.
So you said that all of your road construction money today comes out of the CIP sales tax?
That's all we have. Or
Jay, you saw that, remember that CIP list? It was $140 million.
I know there's plenty, everybody's got a list longer than current funding, I understand that. I didn't realize that Edmond spent, the only money they spent on roads, that matching funds when ODOT offers or ACOG offers, all that comes out of CIP?
Yeah, so we have 2 cents for our general fund, and as was mentioned earlier, even of that 2 cents, 2/3 automatically goes to public safety. So that leaves 1/3 of our general fund to operate the rest of our operations, because as has been mentioned, we can get $0 from property tax for operations. So, yeah.
That's all we're doing. I mean, that's why they have so many stores.
Other questions before someone gets to jump in and learn how to run these meetings? Yes, did you have
I have more. Go ahead.
Steve or any of the staff, if you had unlimited amounts of funds, is there a dollar amount the city would like to spend on these kind of things every year? Can we know that?
Well, I think I would say staff spent a lot of time trying to put together a realistic list for you.
Right.
There are things that are not on that list.
I understand.
So, I don't even know how to answer that. Gentlemen?
I mean, we know it's not realistic or anything, but we're talking about a big number that most of us don't have a very good perspective of. Again, trying to say, hey, if you had unlimited funds, would you spend $50 million a year on this kind of things, or 12 million, or 100 million, or?
So are you talking specifically on the street resurfacing, or are you talking about all the projects?
To me, it's all the projects that y'all suggested to us, plus the ones we're gonna come up with.
So we don't have a number annually for all the various projects that depend on growth rates of Edmond and everything else. We just have them for the resurfacing program. And with that, right now we are spending $4 to $5 million a year roughly. We haven't been spending that for a long period of time. We got way behind, and as you know, asphalt, once it starts failing, you start failing the base, and it's a snowball effect, and it costs more and more money to fix. So we're projecting $20 million is our best guess until we get our data back on our roads to see what condition they're at. Is what we need to be spending annually to keep our roads as good as Oklahoma City's roads. I mean, that's really when I answer the phone and somebody says the roads are better in Oklahoma City, I say they have a geo bond. It's not about that.
That's funny.
Maybe a question for Kathy, I guess. Earlier we talked about renewing one of the temporary taxes, but were you talking about, or does the city have any intel? Are they trying to renew both of the expiring March 27 taxes in November in addition to this, or is there not?
I think what was recommended was just the one that's for operations, not the capital improvement one. We'll look at that and figure that one out after this process plays out. Yes.
Back to what Jay Lemon was talking about, it looks to me like, from if they're saying the sweet spot is 10 to 15 mils for some number of years, the chart says that we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 230 million dollars. And if we start with that, we're not gonna be able to ask for something more than that, probably. Maybe we start with the end in mind and start budgeting around that, would be my guess.
So for the sake of time, I wanna make sure that we try to get as close to 8 o'clock as possible, because I know you have families and things to go home to. Real quick, and this is a question that I have, just show of hands, how many of you have a project in your mind that is not on the list?
I haven't studied the rule.
I'm not asking you to share that, but
I'm confident I will.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. So if, it's okay. So if you do, what would be incredibly helpful is, would you email that to me so I can share it with the appropriate staff person, so that when they get up to speak, they can be as prepared as possible. So if you know, I'm not saying that if you don't email me, you can't bring it up in a meeting, but if you have an idea of a project that you don't see on this, if you would email it to me, I will get it to them so that when they're up and going through the projects, we can be as prepared as possible on that. Is that fair? Okay. All right, so next on the agenda, so we have a chair and a vice chair. Here's the role of the chair. The chair will be to essentially run this meeting, manage running the meeting of the agenda that is put together. Vice chair, your whole job is if the chair's not there, you do that job. Really beyond that, in a short-term task force, that's ultimately what that job would be. So that's where we're at. It's not necessarily my job to recommend to who should do that. So you need to work through that. Now, I will say this is a voting item. This is an item we'll have to vote on. With a large group like this, we will do a roll call vote on everything so that we get an accurate count for our meeting minutes and for open records after the fact. So we'll have 2 votes. Actually, we'll have 3 votes. We have a chair, a vice chair, and then if you decide you want to set some meeting dates, we will not do a roll call vote for adjournment. We assume everyone will be on board for adjournment.
Stacy?
Yes.
Quick question, are we expected to have a third meeting?
What the initial goal was, we wanted to set 3 meetings so that everyone knew the expectation going in. We as staff made a miscalculation, so we could not legally have that first meeting. And I apologize for that. I know that pushed things back a little bit. So we have 2 meetings set. You will need more than 2 meetings, I'm fairly certain.
So I'm just bringing it up, should we set that third meeting before we assign a chair to make sure that person is going to be here for the third meeting?
We can certainly take that item next if that's what you all would like
I'm
to do.
just bringing it up.
I would
That
recommend
might be an
setting
issue.
more than 1 more meeting date. I would recommend setting at least a couple meeting dates. You have the entirety to meet, I think it was brought up earlier, to meet, if this wanted to go on in November, you have most of July to meet.
So can you
Essentially.
can you give us a deadline after our second meeting, and then what is our deadline?
So was it all July, Jane? Was that correct?
So timeline, the special meeting for city council for them to call an election will be August 19th, which gives us a few days to get to county election board. There's a Monday before that I think we were thinking maybe a workshop would be the last date for presentation of whatever you all come up with, which would be August 12th. So really that August 12th is kind of your
Drop dead.
drop dead.
So essentially, in your next meeting that's set is July 1. So you have between July 1, which is your next scheduled meeting, and your presentation to council, the workshop, is on 8/12. So you've got, that's why I say roughly all of July to meet.
But the recommendation is to 8/5, right? I mean.
Yeah, ideally you'd want to have it ready to go so that you can put together your presentation and be ready to go. So that's what I'm saying, really July is what you're looking at as far as meeting times. It will also help us if you set those meeting times, because we have to reserve this space, and this space really works well for this.
I noticed July 1 is a Monday night, this is Tuesday, obviously.
Correct.
Is there any reason why it's one or the other?
No, well, we did that based upon, there were city council meetings and planning commission meetings, but essentially, it's up to you all, really.
But there's no city council on July 1st.
There's not.
Marcus or?
It-
Okay.
Oh, yes.
You're July 1st.
How does it work with regard to a quorum here? I mean, if there's 13 show up,
13.
then we can move forward.
So staff doesn't need any time prior to that August 12th meeting or workshop?
Oh, no, we do. That's why I was saying, really, you wanna conclude your meetings by the end of July.
Okay.
So we shoot.
So you need about 10
And
minutes.
sooner if possible.
Sooner if possible, yes.
Well, I think July 8th is gonna be city council.
July 8th is it?
Yes, so Jane, you reached out as far as availability here, right? What were some of the dates?
So July 9th, July 15th, and then July 22nd, and that misses the city council meetings.
That's if you wanna meet once a week. Obviously, if you wanna meet multiple times a week, you all are the ones deciding that.
Marcus, are you good on the 22nd?
Yeah, it almost makes, it would seem like going ahead and deciding to meet, we can always cancel the meeting, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so the room could be reserved and we could go ahead and set up, meet once a week, and if it turns out that it's not needed or for some reason it's not, or
And we went ahead and blocked the space on the dates I just listed, so
Right.
if you wanna meet then.
Is anyone opposed to meeting weekly? I mean, this is a pretty big deal, so if we
let's get done.
Weekly is a lot,
yeah.
and then some of us have things already planned on our schedules, we've been kind of chatting. I think we should just do the
Could we have a show of hands of how many people would be willing to meet weekly? Because I think it's gonna be required personally, I mean.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to push it.
Do you say yes or no?
Do what?
Hands or not?
Oh, this isn't an actual vote.
Yeah.
He was just curious. This is an actual vote.
It's just a general suggestion.
Yeah, I think you guys are just trying to figure out how to get to
Josh, what was wrong with the July 1st day?
Huh?
What was wrong with the July 1st?
We are.
You're already meeting July 1st.
And then
That's
we're
your next
trying
meeting.
to set a third meeting for sure.
There's
Before we
one
appoint a chair.
And we know for a fact that July 9th would work in this space. And this is why we try to set some meetings in advance, because we know that it's gonna be incredibly difficult to get 25 schedules to align.
But if that's when the room's available and it seems like there's about 13 people that could show up on those 4 days, then it seems like a foregone conclusion that we can make that decision.
We haven't made any decisions. We just tried to get some information ahead of time. So,
Work with you.
You're gonna have to adjourn in 5 minutes.
unless you want us to make that decision for you.
I'm saying I propose that decision.
There you go.
I think we should book the dates, so we have a good
So real quick, so Jane, again, the dates that we know, if we need to change this, we can, but we know that we work weekly here would be
July 9th,
July 9th,
July 15th,
July 15th,
July 22nd.
July 22nd, and then you needed.
How about the 29th and 30th?
I haven't asked, but I can.
We don't know how many meetings you'll need and how many you won't need.
Yeah, but like Tim suggested, we can, canceling is much easier than adding another.
Sure.
So we could just book them and then if we don't need it, we don't need it.
Other thoughts? This is your task force.
I'd support that. Let's book 4 dates.
We can certainly get 13 on those dates.
Any other thoughts? So, Katie, I'm gonna need a list so that we can do this. So then,
Someone need a motion from this group?
well, we will need a motion, that's why we're gonna elect the chair and vice chair. So we can come back to this and vote on it.
At some point, as a group, we're voting on the project.
Correct.
list And
Correct.
the mill levy and the term, so I think we need to set that date that we're going to be voting on that, and we need the most people, I think it's only fair to have the most people here that's possible.
you all need to discuss that.
Are you recommending that it's July 22nd is that date that we try to have final vote?
It definitely could be, I just think we need to make that clear. So, people can look at their calendars and see if we can get as many people here as possible.
Is everyone here July 22nd?
Yeah, I think that's
great.
Can we get a show of hands, July 22nd is the date most people.
Yeah, that's good. Can we count?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like.
Glendale, are you on? Oh, okay. Can everybody raise their hand again?
Who can be here for the 22nd?
22nd.
And it's gonna be really tough to get everyone.
Is everybody good with that plan, no matter how many times we meet in between? Is everybody good with that 22nd voting day?
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a moment to vote on. Because you need to elect a chair and a vice chair.
So let me ask you a question, is there anybody that feels strong about being the chair?
Like to nominate somebody.
Everybody raise their hand.
Well, I mean, if there's someone,
Can you nominate somebody?
just discuss amongst yourselves.
I like to nominate Brett Town.
Ooh.
Who would have more experience?
That does not sound like a vote of confidence.
Who would have more experience? Retired city manager.
You're not city manager.
Superintendent. You know, I have some reservations, and I wrote on my application, I have some reservations, but I felt like I just brought a different perspective because I've done 24 bond issues. But that's where I would come from. I'm not sure yet. I think we need it, but I'm not sure yet of the size of the scope and things like that, but I'm willing to move it forward and put it before the people. That's where I sit on this.
Was that a yes?
There's somebody strongly wanting to be
Is there
chair.
anybody else? who would
Good
like to-
acceptance speech.
Oftentimes, I'm not gonna say that you have to do this, oftentimes the chair of one of these is the one that also presents before the city council. So if that's something that you all think you're going to want to do and have that chair be your spokesperson to present this, you might keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, see, I don't want it to be like it's a nascent approval from the school, me being that person. That would be my biggest reservation.
Absolutely.
Nominate Todd McGinnis.
I see very enthusiastic.
Red too much. I told my fiance I'd leave this meeting without being chairman of the meeting, and I feel like, let me just tell you my thoughts. I believe in the GO bond as a financing mechanism for the city of Edmond. I believe it's more than just fixing problems in the past. I believe that developers and people coming to town have an obligation to figure that out. And I'm just one person on here. I've got questions that have been wonderfully answered. I've got concerns about the politics of getting it done in November. But if all I have to do is just present what you people say, then I'm willing to do that. I didn't seek that out. So I guess that's my pitch, so.
Well, you're. Any others before Todd gets?
Well, did that Klein or did he?
I believe it did not sound like he accepted.
That's an
How about vice chair?
It's an awkward one. We'll get to that next. We gotta do one at a time.
Yeah, it looks too political. I understand with Marcus.
I appreciate you all
Call for the vote.
seeing that.
Okay, so Phil, would you please make that in a motion?
Yes, I move chair would be Todd McGinnis.
Second.
Make that. All right, I'm gonna go through these. That's your answers yes, no, or abstain. Blundell.
Yes.
Buxton.
Yes.
Conrad.
Yes.
Frame.
Yes.
Ground.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Kilgore.
Yes.
Cujo.
Yes.
Lemon. Yes.
With your buddy.
I think he was afraid he was gonna be the chair. McCaleb,
Yes.
McInnes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Olberding,
Yes.
Perry,
Yes.
Rader,
Yes.
Raines, Randall,
Yes.
Wright,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Strecker,
Yes.
Town,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Watkins.
Yes.
You have a chair. Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to you to lead item number 10.
I think I would entertain a motion for a vice chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
nominate Jay as vice chair.
The guy that almost didn't vote for me?
Second.
I didn't hear who that was.
Who was it?
Who made the motion?
Jay.
Jay
James.
Jay Buxton.
Jay Buxton, and who seconded?
Jay.
Okay. Okay, and that is for vice chair for Jay Lemon.
Are there any other nominations for vice chair before we move on to vote? Thank you.
Close the nomination cease.
Thank you.
Blundell,
Yes.
Buxton,
Yes.
Conrad,
Yes.
Frame,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Kilgore,
Yes.
Cujo,
Yes.
Lemon,
Yes.
McCaleb,
Yes.
McInnes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Olberding,
Yes.
Perry,
Yes.
Rader,
Yes.
Raines, Randall,
Yes.
Reich,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Strecker,
Yes.
Town,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Watkins.
Yes.
You have your vice chair. And so now we would need a motion to set those dates. What were the dates again?
July 9th, July 15th, and July 22nd.
So moved.
We're confirming that July 1st is the next meeting.
July 1st is set as the next meeting, correct?
Thank you.
July 9th. What was the third date? July?
22nd.
22nd.
And the 22nd.
Second. Yeah.
You want to do a roll call vote on that too?
Yes. We're gonna roll call all the votes.
Casey, can we do a little
Yes.
discussion before?
Yes,
we
yes,
vote?
yes.
Please, thank you so much.
So in the email, when we applied for these positions, we said that we would be here for the meetings. 2 of those dates, I won't be here, so will there be a Zoom option, or is it just me going back to the YouTube videos to review those?
Unfortunately, the state law does not allow us to provide a Zoom option for an open meeting. So yes, you would need to go back and review those.
And how fast, after the meeting, will they be produced and put on YouTube?
Tomorrow? Tomorrow, this will be up tomorrow.
24 hours.
Yeah.
Alright. I won't be here for 2 meetings, just so I'm gonna be out of the country.
I just want to clarify that Richard Wright made the motion and James Buxton seconded, correct?
Yes.
Other way around.
Okay.
Motion second. Is that?
Anybody else have any discussion or comments or questions regarding the meeting dates?
Any reason why we wouldn't meet the 29th? Just again, to have that as our back pocket plan. More might be better.
How often, when do you have to schedule that?
We would be able to, if you start getting this process and you feel like you're not gonna get there, we can schedule another meeting. Yes.
All right.
Anybody else? No, I think we're done with
Question.
that. Thank you. Casey?
Okay, Blundell,
Yes.
Buxton, Conrad,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Ground,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Kilgore,
Yes.
Cujo,
Yes.
Lemon,
Yes.
McCaleb,
Yes.
McInnes,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Olberding,
Yes.
Perry,
Yes.
Rader,
Yes.
Raines, Randall,
Yes.
Wright,
Yes.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Strecker,
Yes.
Town,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Watkins.
Yes.
So you can.
Comments is next one.
Yep, just read what it says.
Thank you, Casey. So we got a couple more items quickly. Appreciate everybody's patience. It's 8:05. This is a public meeting open to citizens' comments. Are there any citizen comments that want to participate? Keep in mind, there are comments from the members of the task force coming up on the next agenda item. So,
And if you actually read it, it is limited to 3 minutes or less.
thank you. Any citizens not on the task force want to speak?
Do we have a?
Yes, sir.
I'll be less than 3 minutes because we're past 8 o'clock.
I'll watch my watch, I won't.
Please introduce yourselves.
Taylor Wilson,
Thank you, Taylor.
question what I want you to consider would be the operational cost of any new projects that you may or may not consider as part of this. Because you're obligating the city to future costs in a declining budgetary environment. City is growing at a negative 1%, as we heard earlier in the report, we're growing assets at 6%, the appraised value. The appraised value on that schedule, when you looked at it too, if you looked at what city had the largest appraised value to population, was Edmond. Are we saying that's causation? But I would just keep that in mind. Also, I would just take into account we're going through a whole big tax change in 30 days. So to sell this is not going to be quick. And so it's not going to be simple. But I, like others, appreciate everyone here serving and doing it.
The grocery sales tax went off, you said tax change.
Well,
This is a tax change.
In this section of the agenda, it's one-way comment.
So what I meant is a tax change. I believe I can speak to the chairman. And so it's a tax change that's this. And I would also include, is it the intent to hold the current sales tax or to roll that back and balance your tax structure on the go forward?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anybody else who wants to offer any citizen comments before we move to the next item? Thank you very much. Item 13 on our agenda, comments from members of the task force.
I have one comment. I was on a year with the Arcadia Master Plan Committee, and I was a little disappointed that I guess it's gonna be a hard sell to get the Arcadia Lake project in there. But I do think we need to do some quality of life things to sell this, not just streets. I mean, streets are important, I know, but we do need quality of life things in there.
I agree.
But it kind of surprised me if we're not gonna include Arcadia Lake or the trails at Arcadia Lake, why did we put them on the priority list?
So that they can be addressed during that section, so that you understood. They can be, but it has to be a different type of law.
Okay.
So, and I've heard that comment several times, Caleb, so is that something that the staff can look into between now and when we get back together? I know it's fast, the first, or how does that happen? Kathy, I'm asking now, I guess, Alan, Kathy, somebody?
It would have to be a separate proposition on the ballot, and it's a separate section of the Constitution. It's called a general obligation limited tax bond, and what you can spend those on is much broader, and you don't have to own the property, and it just, Oklahoma City uses them for their economic development program.
So does the voter, if there's 3 items that we've talked about, does the 4th item move the voters, and also that's a different Title 27 and this 26?
I mean, I think if it's, related to a very popular project, I think it has more to do with what the project is than the proposition itself, in my opinion.
Did I hear you say that was limited to 5 minutes?
Yeah, which you wouldn't need to worry about.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems like we worth looking into. How about gets fired up about roads other than Steve Lawrence? Any other comments from the task force before we adjourn?
I'm just a little concerned about, when I look at the proposals and I see that if we fund this on a GO bond, that we're gonna use that money for another area. Instead of getting further ahead, it looks like we're just maintaining where we are. And maintaining where we are isn't sufficient enough, I don't think, for the general public if we're going to increase their taxes. So that's right.
Thanks, Brad. Jay Lemon?
I don't think cities or municipalities take a big swing very often. And I consider it's a pretty big swing for everything. So I'm excited to be a part of this and look forward to big things. And I don't think we should exclude anything from our wish list before this group gets to entertain it and then invent. I think it's bring your list. Bring them all.
Well, I think Casey
let's
offered.
get some more people working.
Casey offered to receive input between now, it's not speak now for every holy peace till July 1st, right? I mean, we just don't have a public meeting setting.
Correct, yeah. If you will get me projects that you already have in mind, I'm happy to get them set so that they can be prepared.
It doesn't mean that you can't bring it up after the fact. They just won't be as prepared to speak to this.
Are there any private, projects that are in partnership potentially with a public entity that, are already in the works that aren't on this list? Or that might, like, for example, like YMCA, you know, they have a partnership with the library for their next, like, or, other entities, I know like Norman just had, you know, like WIPAC had private, public partnerships or with other, health entities that could need to be considered as part of these projects as well.
Are there any other potential partnership projects that are hanging out there that aren't on this list? Not to my knowledge.
I do know if you do those, we did those with the Y and the city, and we did that with the tennis center. We had to have AG approval prior to those, so it lengthens this process on the front end quite considerably.
Correct.
Thanks, Kristen. Anybody else have anything to offer for the good?
A simple
Yes, sir.
question, could we get the access code for the Wi-Fi in here?
Oh, there's an access code, because I think other people were able.
Oh, okay, well, when I called up, asked for a code, so.
Oh, okay, we'll check on that. Absolutely, sorry about that.
That's named the room that we're most Anybody else? Yes, Rick?
Quickly, I think it'd be helpful next time if we had a breakdown of current ad valorem or property tax rates by entity. In other words, how much is going to the VOTEC, how much is going to the school district, how much for the school district's bonds, how much is going to county. Because I think that would give us perspective with respect to this 10 to 15 mil range that we generally talked about. And I think that would be helpful to have that.
We do have that millage rate in your packet, there was,
I think he was talking about the breakdown of where those taxes go, Casey. You know, how you get every year your bill, it says VOTEC, library, library.
okay, yeah, cause I think in here they were just grouped as going to the county.
I think you're right.
So you just for Oklahoma County, correct?
Well,
Oh, we had
They
to
want the
break
school
bring
district.
it, but.
Well, because, here's why we gave you what we gave you, because you could live in Edmond and you could be in totally different school districts.
Well, then.
Yeah.
The school district's 65, the county's 22, the VOTEC's 15.69, for a total of 104.15. So Rick's saying perspective wise, it sounds like you're doing 15, but what is 15 of the whole, right? So the question is, so right around, we can get you details, but it's 104, right at 100.
I think that would be.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely, we'll have that for you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I may be jumping your agenda,
But it's only one item left.
okay. But I want to point out that tonight we had some economic development all-stars presenting to us, and I appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Anybody else have any comments? So on behalf of everybody's staff, all the people that are here, thank you. I got to meet some new people tonight. That's fantastic. And so we look forward to July 1st. With that in mind, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.